there's a lot of like would-be possible movies that I read about that I'm often fascinated by. Things that almost happened. Things that could have been made. Sequel ideas. Back to the Future 4 is one of the ones that, when I found out about, has fascinated me. Now, Back to the Future Part 4 has been something that Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale notoriously do not want to happen. In fact, they even made shirts that are like an X over Back to the Future 4 after Back to the Future 3, because they were so against it they needed to make t-shirts or something. I don't know, but they did that. So this is not a pitch I have for Back to the Future 4. This is an actual treatment that actually got written. So in the late 90s, Ed Solomon, who's famous for writing the Bill and Ted movies and Men in Black, was approached to write a treatment on the possibility of Back to the Future 4. Universal was looking at the viability of making new films out of some of their IP then and trying to develop them. To my understanding of this process, none of these films got made. There was like a Quantum Leap movie thing about quantum leapers or something, all sorts of weird stuff. I don't think anything came of it. But one of the things they did develop was a idea for Back to the Future 4. Now, under this treatment that Ed Solomon was writing, Doc Brown would go back to the Roswell UFO crash, and he would crash into the UFO, and that would damage the engine of his time machine, and then he would be stuck there and had to rebuild it. And like, never point out the aliens, but obviously, like, because he crashed into a UFO, he'd have to like talk to them. Or are they doing one of those things with like the X-Files where it's like the government was using alien technology? Apparently, like, in some people have said it's the DeLorean, which doesn't make sense because the DeLorean was, spoilers I guess, destroyed at the end of 3, and others saying it's the time locomotive that was crashed into. But regardless, Doc Brown was stuck there. Supposedly he was going to have a female companion who was kind of a would-be scientist instead of Marty. Michael J. Fox wouldn't be involved in this. Apparently it was going to be Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown and a new kind of companion. And that their pitch was, and I don't know if she was ever told about this, was Sarah Michelle Gellar. That was kind of their top pick to play this would-be scientist person. Now, part of what I keep hearing about this treatment that I find interesting is everyone in their thing saying this was a treatment that was going to be used for 4 and 5. I have no clue what the idea was for 5 was. I could not find any info about that. But every report on this is basically like, this was an idea that was going to be used for Back to the Future 4 and 5, and they're going to shoot them back to back like they did with 2 and 3. I don't understand why they're really pushing the 4 and 5 thing when they didn't have any ideas for 5. Maybe that never leaked out. But it's basically like the idea was that they were going to be in Roswell, New Mexico, and do the UFO thing. This was previously a thing in an Indiana Jones script in the 90s that George Lucas was behind. So it seems to be something that Spielberg and co are really interested in. Now, apparently Spielberg and Solomon would have been executive producers on this. Now, Solomon only wrote a treatment and like kind of ideas for it, and it was supposed to be maybe going to be written by Terry Russo and Ted Elliott, who are famous Hollywood screenwriters, and there's other screenwriters who are possibly involved in this, but it never, supposedly all of them denied involvement. I haven't heard any quote from Ed Solomon, which is sort of interesting. My only thing about this, and supposedly I've read that Bob Gale, Robert Zemeckis, and Universal decided to turn this down, is that everyone's surprised because there's always these things like polls and so forth, what sequel most people want to see, and you always hear Back to the Future 4. Here's my thing about this, is like, why was it pursued? That's kind of the thing. It's like Universal knew they were going to say no. They made those t-shirts, so of course they were going to say no. Who makes a t-shirt just all willy-nilly, you know what I mean? So they clearly knew they were going to say no. So who was the person who pushed them? Now, I think a lot of this has to do with where Ed Solomon was in his career. And he had just written Men in Black, which happens to be at least executive produced by, he might have produced, I forget, Steven Spielberg, who was majorly involved in the first Men in Black. He clearly went to Ed Solomon and went, let's see if we could do this, because Men in Black is a you know, sci-fi comedy. There's not a lot of great ones, to be honest with that, so maybe you should try your hand at that. That's why I keep seeing Spielberg is involved as an executive producer. Clearly he was spearheading this, and a lot of people have admitted when any of Back to the Future 4 thing has come up, they always say, well, if Spielberg wanted it to happen. And I think Spielberg sort of actually tried for this to happen. I'm not trying to talk crazy or something. This guy worked with Spielberg on a thing, and he clearly went like, could you develop this for me and see where it goes? And it didn't go anywhere because they totally shot it down. But this was as the only Back to the Future that I know about that went anywhere. There's all these things about Back to the Future at the beginning, which, what is Doc just fall in the toilet and that's the whole movie? That sounds awful. I've heard all these other supposed pitches that just sound like complete crap. This sounded at least interesting to me because I've heard movie press people talk about it on podcasts, mention the Sarah Michelle Gellar Back to the Future 4, which is unfair because I think probably someone told her they were considering her maybe for a treatment, but clearly like they probably never even met with her. She probably heard about it later at a party or something. This was as far as a Back to the Future 4 got, and that's all it was Doc in his time locomotive running into a UFO. That sounds like amazing fan art, but it doesn't sound like a great movie, to be honest with you, and especially without the involvement of Michael J. Fox, who I kept reading probably wasn't involved because of Parkinson's and other things. It just doesn't sound like it probably would have been a great movie, which is probably why they didn't go further on it, but that's as far as any Back to the Future 4 ever got in development, was this one with the treatment by Ed Solomon.